Hey everybody. I just wanted to, for our first discussion question for the emergency and disaster planning class, I want us to look at our own communities a little bit when it comes to community risk analysis. In one of the other courses, we talk about doing a risk assessment in our community, and it's from a little bit of a different perspective as far as identifying risk that we can prevent or mitigate the damage from. And while this is similar, it's still a little bit different. Whenever we're looking at communities and with our work being community based, we have to look at where high risk areas are. And with different professions, that means different things. If you're in law enforcement, it might be a higher crime rate. For that fire department that's only solely a fire department, it might be where there's a higher risk of having a fire or where there's more fires. For EMS, it may be where there's an elderly population or those with disabilities. We've also talked about high risk audiences and what those are, the very old, the very young, those with disabilities, and those that live in poverty. So when we're looking at it from a disaster preparedness standpoint and a planning standpoint, there's some other factors that we have to take into place. And in this, in the I think it was chapter 2 in your book, it talks about that whole process of hazard analysis and how you determine based on perhaps knowledge that you have or past experiences, what disasters might be um, might impact your area more than others. You know, in different parts of the state, like I know, up in the northern part of the state, they have tornadoes are going to be worse. Where I'm living now, we have this flooding problem that I don't really know how to deal with quite yet, but I am working on it. So in different areas, it's there's different things. There may be areas where we live that are maybe more impacted by man-made disasters, terrorism, those kinds of things. Active shooter we hear so much about now. So as you go through this hazard identification process, it's great to be able to overlay this information on a map. If you have a map of your area and you want to look at what area might be impacted most by whether it's an earthquake, a tornado, or flooding, and then what's in that area. Identify your hazard, your high hazard areas, whether it's due to a facility in that area or the neighborhood in that area, what they refer to as the societal analysis. The economic analysis, is there a particular business in that area that's most likely to be impacted where if that business is impacted, it's going to impact the whole community, whether it's the people that work there, the families of those workers, or the community in and of itself. I lived in a community one time and we had a fire at a major manufacturing facility, and the impact was great. The impact was great. Also, environmental analysis. Where are your hazardous materials? What sort of natural resources do you have in that area? Is there a dam? Water supply? That sort of thing. How is that going to be impacted by a natural or man-made disaster? And then how can some of these things be mitigated? So that's some of that process that we're going through. So for the purposes of this first blog discussion, and we are going to use the discussion board for this particular piece, and I'll set up some questions on there. But I want you to think about your own area and kind of do a mini hazard assessment. I'm not asking you to go through the whole process and ask all those questions, and do this map overlay. But I want you to think about what disasters are more common for your area, that may be more apt to be a problem in your area, whether they are natural or whether they are man-made. They could be transportation issues, railroads, things like that. Um, and um, and also the impact of those things, and just discuss that. Tell us about your community and tell us about the hazards that are most apt to be a problem in your community, where the areas that are most apt to be impacted in your community, and some things that might be done to look at some of the mitigation. Nobody likes to think that a disaster is coming. For many communities, depending on size, a disaster is one that taxes the resources of that community. And so for many of these communities, it might simply be a large residential fire, maybe an apartment building fire. And that might be a big impact and what would be considered a disaster, where in some communities it's everyday news. And so we have to think about that when we're looking at what those disasters are that might impact our particular area and the different people and processes that will be impacted. And all of this goes to planning. I think planning is huge. So, in the discussion question, I want you to think about what those areas are in your community. If you are not a part of an emergency services organization, use your own community for that. You use the town where you live and begin to look at your community where you live with a more judicious eye as far as what the high hazard areas might be. Is there a hospital, nursing care facility, those types of things? We really have to think of all areas and how those areas could be impacted if a disaster does occur as we go through this planning process. So that's our discussion question for this first unit. And so I'll be looking forward to reading your responses. Thank you so much.